I had that anxiety of like, oh man, are people going to be willing to pay this amount? I want everybody to be able to afford it, or that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, it's so important to be able to value your art for the amount that it really is.
It's Johnny Late Night! And now here's your host, Johnny Rogers!
Welcome everyone to episode number 39 of The Johnny Rogers Show. My guest today is a comedian, a poet, and he's a returning guest of the show. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about his latest project called InnerGenerational. The project puts a focus on the discovery and showcasing of the second-generation immigrants' experience in finding their place in Canada. If you want to catch a live show, there will be a free-flow showcase in Toronto May 8th at the Chinatown Centre, Markham Friday May 13th, Toronto Friday, May 20th, which is a show with R.I.S.E Edutainment, as well as a show May 27th in Toronto with Asian Resilience Collective Canada. All ticket links and tour dates can be found at InnerGeneration.com. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for my friend and yours, Anto Chan.
And yeah, being able to actually put something out there also makes it so that you can just stop working on that project too, which is always nice. I feel like I've just spent so much time on this. Now I could finally like get it out there, and also it's just like such a great way to reward yourself. You're just like, okay, now this is done. I poured myself into it, and then even if there's things that you wish you could correct, to a certain extent, you're just like, okay, well, I can just do it better next time, so.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, the second attempt will just be better. That was the fun part about like starting to make music, was approaching it differently from comedy. Because the idea with it, like music, you can only either perform it live or release it online. There's no like testing it out, it's kind of just is what it is. And then you either are brave enough to release it or you're not. And taking that like leap and being like, oh, okay, let me just throw that out there, and then finally just having that off my chest, it was like, man, it's gonna make it so much easier to do so many other things I know that before I would have second guessed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even just the idea of doing it in an avenue that you have less experience in, it probably was exhilarating to a certain extent to be like, oh man, I just got to go for it, and and that's one thing we all know we need is just more white rappers, that's what we
there's not enough. That's all. But it's like, at the end of the day though, it's just, it was mainly for myself, because like what I realized in writing, and you probably get this too with poetry as well, right? Like when you write these things, you can take them a number of different ways, but usually I find like writing in the sense of poetry is like you're trying to get something out, or you're trying to manifest something perhaps better for your life. So, and the cool thing with music, and 11 touched on this before too, is like we get to kind of write our manifestations to like a beat that you can, and that kind of carries the message, and it makes it easier to remind yourself. Even if you're the only one listening to it, it's powerful in that way at the very least.
Yeah. I love the dual use and connection that you have to that, the idea of manifestation and also just like airing out frustrations. And there's so many layers to that too, right? And so I really love being able to just reflect on even just a moment that had passed, being able to highlight storytelling in that way too, just personal challenges that you have, things that you dislike. Like there's so many layers to what we can be writing about and for, and so to be able to put that into just expression, I think that that's always valuable, whether other people hear it or not. Like that's not the most important. That's not like the reason you do it. It's like kind of like one of the beautiful byproducts of what it of actually creating and putting it out there. So, but I always definitely agree with the idea of that's something that I'm still working on too, just because as like a live performance artist, one of the main things that has been challenging is to be able to actually capture everything that I've been doing. And that was one of the biggest reasons that we're actually getting somebody to film all of the events that we're going to be doing for InnerGenerational. It's so that I can actually capture this and put it into, whether it ends up being an EP with the other artists, or even into the short film, or this even a short special or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be able to capture everything so that we have the content. And if I decided that I wanted to have it in a way where it can be consumed in a media way, then there's a versatility inside of it. And that's one of the main reasons why the idea of actually putting it together was actually, a lot of it was so that there can be a capturing of it. And that was one of the coolest things, is the idea of how it's not in my hands to think of how to make it a perfected special in a certain way or things like that. I know a lot of people stress out about recording their specials for that reason as well too.
Yeah.
For them wanting it to be a certain way. Whereas now when I have a filmmaker coming in, they have a vision of how they're wanting to connect with it. And I like that aspect of it, you know, the idea of putting it out there. I'm still doing it in a show, but I have no idea what the final result is going to be and how they're going to tell our
what they're
stories.
Going to cut it together as, because like I like also kind of relinquishing that that power, if you will, that kind of creative control over a certain project. Like working on stuff with a director has always been some of my favorite things, because they can like, they're looking at you objectively and they can get the best takes out of it. Whereas you as the artist are thinking like, oh, my hair doesn't look good in this shot. Let me cut away. You know what I mean? Like you have a different lens that you view the material with. So it's like always helpful.
And we're all so vain too, right? Like I remember I had this one photo that was for the project and I didn't like it because even just like now, there's so much hair and like whatever minimal thing that literally no one usually really cares about or whatever. And I remember my hair was down and my hair was a bit like, you know, out or whatever. And then the person who's putting together the site, as well as the person who took the photo, everybody was like, this is the shot. It just shows your joy. It's wonderful. I love it, whatever. And then I was like, but my hair is out of the, you know, like, and who gives a shit, right? But it's so interesting what we end up highlighting or caring about in that way. But the essence of us as people being captured in, whether it's a visual or audio or whatever, to be able to capture our essence is such a powerful way to approach art and to be able to approach the connection to whether it's film or audio or whatever. So that's one of the main things that I've really spent a lot of time as I'm preparing for these events. It's really like, how do I connect people to my truest essence and what it's like to connect to me on an everyday, if we were hanging out and spending time together? How do I motivate other people? How do I make them grateful to be alive? All these things that I do on a daily basis with my friends and the people I care about, that's what I hope to bring to the shows, so that I can also have that type of relationship with myself too as I'm approaching it. I'm not like, this has to be the most perfect show ever. Like, I think that when I first started building it, I had that idea of, oh, I'm filming it now. Now it needs to be like as if I'm creating a special. But this just feels like such an interesting way to take a step towards something even bigger, you know, because I am still capturing my stuff, but I also have like a huge team of people that I'm motivating to create stuff that inspires them and that excites them, or that makes them feel as if they're all part of something bigger. And that to me is huge, because I always wanted that, you know, I always wanted to build towards something that it wasn't just my own work. Like the art is great, you know, I love sharing that, but the idea of, if somebody was asking me, would you rather have your own special and put that out, or would you rather have this project? I would definitely choose the project, just because I really like the aspect of the team building and like it feels like a family, you know. And if I keep going down this route of describing what I'm saying, it's gonna sound like a cult very soon.
Like we meet once
and we all
blood.
It's always so funny, because I have a certain, like, I think naturally I am very cheesy in terms of just like the way I care, and like I work with kids, right?
So well. Unlike a child.
Yeah, exactly. So I work with kids, so I have that element of very cheesiness of just like sweet and like caring and like motivating each other, that kind of thing. But I also have like the years of the calluses and the thick skin from comedy,
The
and just
bitterness of
like
comedy.
the bullying that came along with comedy. So
Yeah.
it's so funny to like have that element, because I can and I do still make fun and joke around about my extremely sensitive soft core, and also there's just this like ridiculously overtly like macho stand-up comedy-ness in me as well too, where I have. So it's interesting existing in this, because at the end of the day, I still feel so grateful that my soft side always ends up winning out now, because before it wasn't the same. I was very much more harder on myself.
Yeah, push that shit down.
Well, I still let it out. I still make fun of shit and
of course.
Yeah.
But like, I like the way that you like make fun of yourself or whatever for the softer side. It's never like self-deprecating. It's more of just a self-awareness of who you are. I find there's too many comedians that are, and I guess it's just like the easy thing to go to when you start comedy, but like you start to notice that like if you're only self-deprecating or only bringing yourself down or bringing your group, let's say, down, be it whatever religion, race, whatever you want to talk about, you're just like, it's the manifestation thing, it's the repeating thing, you're just living forever in that mindset. A comedian that always talks about how poor they are on stage will probably remain poor, because you're just staying in that mindset. But if they talked about like all the things they would do with like $1 billion, you're now like thinking in that mindset of what you would do with all of that money.
Manifestation is so powerful though. Like even before my project, so I applied to the Canada Council for the Arts for this specific grant,
We
right?
talked about that on the first podcast.
Yeah.
We're coming full circle.
Yeah, it's so crazy, man. Like, and being able to apply for that and being like, I have no idea what's going to happen, but I feel really good that it's going to happen. The craziest part, man, is the end of February, I had at least 3 people that I know that are incredibly powerful manifestors. They're producers of shows, they're performers. People contacting me, or if I like randomly message them or something, were like, hey, I was just thinking about you this week. I was just letting you know, like, I'm just sending such good love and vibes to you for your grant specifically. It was. And then that week it came.
Wow.
And even one of them was like, I don't know exactly what I've been thinking of you so much. And it was not like they had contacted me since October when I had first told them about the project, but they were like, yeah, I was just thinking about you this week so much, and just kept coming up. And I just like wanted to, and they didn't know when the grant was coming or being told of. So it's just, that's one of the things that I keep telling people is like, if you surround yourself with other people who are manifesting, there's no harm in sharing with them your dreams, right? Whereas I don't know if you've ever seen on Instagram, it's like, don't tell anyone your moves. You don't know who's going to be talking bad about you in their dreams or whatever, that kind of shit. I'm always like, yeah, maybe you're just surrounding yourself with people who are like talking shit about you and that's definitely possible, especially when it comes to having family members who just might not get what you're doing and things. But when you when I have surrounded myself with so many people who are also making their dreams and the shit that they're wanting happen, and they're actually doing it in a way where they're getting funding for it, and they're like, do all these things. It's like crazy, man. Like from where we were last time to now, it's like the amount of stuff that has happened and the amount of like stepping up and leading and like, being ahead of this entire, like, it feels like I have like a mini like corporation of sorts, like you're just, I'm having to it's great. I don't know if you ever gotten funding or whatever, but they're just like, hey, you got the funding, and then here it is, and then I'm just like, oh shit, and I got $60K from them, right? Like $59K.
You're like, so they just 30 on black.
That's what I was saying. They just gave me $60K at one time, right? And I'm just that's like, insane. I used to be addicted to gambling. Like, like, how do you just trust me with this, right? But I think that they've gone through enough times where people want to honor it, that there hasn't been a lot of like fucked up situations or whatever. But it definitely, for just like a split second, my chaos side was like, you know what you could do with 60K? Like it
Yeah,
just
you're
was.
like, we could move to Asia. We could change our name. Could start a
Yeah,
whole
so
new
I
life.
that's the that it was just like so much like at once, right? But
Yeah,
then at the same
yeah.
time, it was like, oh wow, I've never been in a position of being able to also pay artists to be able to help me get what I need to the point that I needed to. And it also shifts like the dynamics, not in the sense of like, oh, they're only doing this for the money kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah.
Because many of the people that are on the project, they're like, I had spoken to them before, was like, if we don't get the funding, we should at least do one of the shows, right? So
Yeah, for
and
sure.
so being able to have that type of relationship already, and then we do get the funding, it made it so that when we're working on it, it's just kind of like all gravy, man. Like we would have been doing it anyways, but to be able to actually have funding and be able to find venues that we're super hyped to go to or be like connect with, that to me is what it's all about, right? Being able to.
It's just going to elevate intergenerational because, like, of the venues now that you can afford, people that don't know you and are just coming to this are like, whoa, this is like an established event organization that focuses
Mhm.
their efforts in one particular field.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it also makes us have to step up and be like, yo, this shit is professional.
Yeah.
Like working with a couple of the other artists that are on this, the amount that they work in their fields and be able to perform and just consistently creating things. Some people, like even our filmmaker Shavar, he does a lot of commercial works too, and like with just big organizations and just being able to connect with people who are so professional in what they do,
Hmm.
and also they're so laid back and chill too at the same time. It really shows that the professionalism comes in the work and it comes with the preparation. It's not always everything has to be so quote unquote. We're still artists, right? We
Yeah,
still fuck
yeah,
around.
yeah.
We still joke
For
around, and
sure, for sure.
yeah,
But
and
like this is though, like, I would just have to touch on this here, like it for any, like, I'm sure I have people listening that are either like currently artists of some form or like thinking about it perhaps. I hope that I'm drawing in that sort of an audience that at least
mm,
like doesn't care if we talk like business stuff about, arts.
yeah,
But like the grant is one great stream of income. Forever artists who have always focused on like, I'll take the door and I'll let the venue take the bar, and hopefully they don't
yeah.
charge me a rental fee, and then I charge $20 tickets, put the shit on Eventbrite or whatever. How has receiving the grant kind of changed the way you're thinking about, like, are you still thinking about, multiple streams of income for the business itself so that it can continue to grow?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I noticed immediately, even just within myself, there was a certain amount of validation in terms of being an artist, knowing that I could have the finances to be able to continue doing this, especially the intensity that I've approached this. At one point, when I first got the grant, I feel like I didn't even think about other things for a couple of weeks, right? Because I'm just planning everything out, thinking of what venues I would love to go and visit and see, what artists I wanted to bring in. I had already contacted some of them. So the amount that I already invested and that I cared about it beyond being paid for it and then being paid for it, it just showed me that this is definitely a path that in the future I'm going to continue applying for as well, right? That to me is a great way of approaching it, is that this is only the first of many for me. And what I also saw, that it was like an ecosystem of paying multiple artists myself too, because from the 60K I'm only receiving a certain amount of that, right? and
Yeah, of
and
course.
that's the thing, is that
I was gonna say you'd have to budget it. Like, they just give you the whole amount, but you're like, all right, how am I going to sort of
exactly,
dole this out per person or per event?
you have to like
You
write
know?
a really intensive budget, and what ends up going forward with it, and then also things that change, and then you have to make documentation of that, and everything's very specific on it. But it also makes sense because they're giving out so much funding, right? But another
Yeah.
thing is, this grant made me really reflect on my history as an artist, right? And so I've been an artist for 15 years. This is my fifth in May. It's going to
Wow.
be
Congrats,
15
man.
years since I did my first comedy set, and
Right after the
yeah,
guy
and
who
I never
ate a
quit.
Subway
I never
sandwich.
quit. Yeah, I never quit. I took breaks, but I
Yeah.
also, during those times, I was still writing, I was still creating. I was still thinking about shows and things, but I was traveling or just really just committing to different parts of my life to nurture those parts of myself. But
I should stop you
yeah.
right there. Like, that is the life of an artist. There's
Yes.
so many people who think that they can only be considered an artist if they are currently producing. They have to be producing and putting out content during that specific time. No. The life of an artist is to reflect what your life is, like reflect that into art. So you can't be creating art if you're not also living and experiencing life. Like all of that, all the stories that you gathered, all the people that you met, all the places you went, the things you saw, like all contributes towards making your art even better, because it's forming you and making you a more well-rounded person and making you more aware of what your voice is and how you think about things and like how you challenge things and have discussions. Sorry,
You also end up running out to a certain extent of stuff to talk about at certain points if you're only doing like if you're creating in a way where it's so specific to, okay, I want to write jokes and I want to write jokes like this, then you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to be doing observational humor in this way. It's just, you end up in a box. Whereas like, I don't want to feel that way. And especially that's one of the best parts about the arts that I've been able to express in is that I'm using the skills that I learned in performance in comedy in all these other forms, and different parts of myself was getting satisfaction from sharing in this way. When I do storytelling, it touches upon a nostalgia, a way in which I'm reliving certain moments to be able to get certain messages forward. When I'm doing poetry, it hits a part of my emotional self that I was overwhelmed a lot of times at those moments, but I can share it in my poetry to build a bridge to a lot of people who might have experienced something similar to that. In my comedy, it's my observations and connections to different situations that I thought were hilarious or humorous, and I am able to touch upon different parts of myself and express it in a different way. And so as a multidisciplinary artist yourself, like in rap or in stand-up or as sharing on videos and whatnot, like all of these different parts of yourself are being touched upon and you're able to express in different ways, and that helps round out a lot of the expression that we're needing to be able to heal ourselves in that. A lot of art for myself is very healing, it's very nurturing, it's very connecting to building towards a better life for myself.
Healing from all the trauma that I caused from being early as an artist. It's like, goddamn, the amount of self-deprecation and the amount of thinking that like I'm not doing enough or I'm not good enough yet or I need to, whatever. Like, sure, you can argue that that stuff did motivate me to get better, but at the same time, you're like, at what cost?
But it's also because you are such like an entrepreneur, you really were passionate about making it even before you even knew what making it was. I remember when we first met, the way in which you held yourself was already so professional. And then I was like, how long have you been doing this? And you're like, 5 seconds, like that's like, like you literally were a professional before you even knew what the professional was of it. And that's just how you were in that way. And it was a certain element of like fake it till you make it. Whereas now when I'm connecting and as we have conversations, there's a certain depth of understanding of self and a lot of the work that you've done, and that's part of growing and that's part of learning. Actually a big part of my, especially my first show that I'm going to be doing. So there's going to be some movement in my sets and what I'm going to share on the different, so there's like 4 different showcases that we're going to be doing. And on the first one, I was just building it out with my team the other day. And I speak obviously about my gongong and my grandfather. And when he passed, I started doing stand-up. But a good part of the show is actually about stand-up and how when I first started, I was so negative and attacking and bullying Asian people in general. I remember when I would see Asian people in the audience, I'd be like, perfect, I can pick on them, because I knew that if I picked on them, the white audiences would really like that, and then they would like me more. And then I was actually basically throwing them under the bus for my own personal gains, and then being able to talk about that on stage for the first time. And so I mentioned it actually last year when they interviewed me for The National, on CBC, and they interviewed me about, how has comedy grown? And I spoke about this, and there was a lot of people who downvoted it or said in the comments that it was like a really negative thing that I would do this and but they also weren't acknowledging the healing that was coming with it, right?
Yeah.
I
You're like, I'm telling you where I
understand.
went wrong, and now I'm telling you what
Yeah,
I'm doing to get better. You asked how it was
exactly.
growing, so you can't grow without a mistake. You know,
Absolutely.
to
Yeah,
criticize the mistake is the fault there. Like, we can't be criticizing mistakes, because if you don't point at the mistake and then help them through it, they're just gonna keep circling on that mistake. Like
absolutely.
someone who gets laughs from making fun of their own race and then just continues to throw them under the bus.
Absolutely. And also, one of the things that I acknowledge too, though, is that people don't always like to hear like others healing that or calling out their own mistakes because they've done something similar, and then they're like, oh wow, like this is like too introspective or too
Yeah.
reflective. This is like making me feel certain things, but like that's the whole point of what I'm wanting to put forward is the fact that I made a lot of mistakes, especially in comedy, because I wanted like audiences to like me so much. And being in Ottawa, all the audiences were quite white, and like I remember multiple times I would look out and I wouldn't see one person that looked like me, and I was there to just please them. And I'm not blaming them. That was still
Yeah,
my
yeah,
decisions,
yeah.
but I
You're putting
felt a
that
lot of
on them. Like, you're feeling that
absolutely
pressure. Like, I have to, as a minority in this crowd, please these people who are all
yes,
white. Like, it's circumstantial.
yeah.
You're not saying that they came up to you and were like, "Hey, boy, you better be funny." You're like, "Well, okay, I get," like,
But they
and
were
you
like,
have
I
to come from
loved,
somewhere though, and they tell you after the show, "I love that part where you made fun of that
yeah,
one Asian dude," and then it just
yeah.
encourages that behavior.
Well, the craziest part was the amount of times that I would be at a show, and then after the show would be done, people would come up to me like, "I loved your set. By the way, what do you call this amount of
Oh
Asians
no.
doing?" And they would just do like a street Asian joke that was super offensive, like
Oh,
really fucked up.
fuck.
And at a certain point, that's what really hit me of like, wow, I need to like change this behavior, because if that's what I'm inviting, and it was for years, I would just go along with it. I'd be like, oh, great, whatever. I didn't realize that that's what I was welcoming or inviting. And then
Hmm.
now, as I've changed my materials, what people come up to me and they usually talk to me about is completely different. Uh, it's just more so about personal stories and moments
Hmm.
of clarity, or just really ridiculously situations more so, compared to before when it was like, I have this one Asian friend who did this before or whatever. And so for me, I've seen the evolution of my interactions with people, and I'm grateful that it's evolved in that way.
Hmm.
At the same time, that also comes with the brunt of people, especially a lot of Asian people, who are unhappy that I had the audacity or the privilege even to be so negative towards Asian people in the beginning, right? And that was one of the things, is that I ended up, the reason is I actually realized is that it was as if I was doing covers. That's what it felt like. You know, I would take whatever the Asian joke was, small eyes, small dick,
Yeah,
eats
yeah.
cats and dogs, like whatever the Asian stereotype was, I would just write a really, what I felt, and I still stand by, these jokes are still, even to now, are good jokes, but the
Yeah, yeah.
punchline was always just a cover. Basically, I was just doing a cover of my favorite street jokes, which
Yeah.
were your bad driver joke or whatever shit like that, you know. So i
Yeah,
I stand by that, as
yeah.
even as a very new artist, or as a new
Objectively, though, it's
comedian.
still a good joke.
Yeah, that's what's
You
funny
need
is
all
that
the words to make this
yeah,
joke work. I love that. You could still
yeah,
pick it apart, like, structurally, though. You're like, if we remove
structurally it was a good
everything
joke.
else, structurally, it's a. If an alien came down and read this joke,
Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not gonna be doing these jokes seriously ever again. But during
yeah.
my show, what I'm planning to do is I'm actually going to be doing multiple of the jokes that I had previously done, and I'm going to like showcase how damaging and how negative those jokes
Mm.
were to me, and I'm trying to pull off some meta shit here. I'm trying to tell the jokes in a very jokey way. I want the audience to laugh to a certain extent, and then I'm gonna call me and the audience out for being like still holding on to these stereotypes. So I don't know how it's gonna go. It's experimentation to a certain extent. But that's what's so interesting about it is that at the root of all of it, the reason I'm doing it is it's basically a self-analysis of the pressures of pleasing other people and being from a different race. And there's so many judgments that come with even just being myself, you know, the idea of never welcoming me to be myself growing up. I was just consistently told that I needed to be one among the others, you know, like both my parents worked for the government. They always told me being a government worker is the best thing, you know, like,
you know, from your experience, right? Like,
absolutely. By the way, I have the best dad joke about my dad, about the government. So,
hey everybody, Johnny here. Just want to take a quick second to thank our newest Patreon subscriber, CLB. I appreciate your support, and because you are subscribed to the show for just $1 a month, you're getting this episode before anyone else. If you want to be cool like CLB, head to patreon.com/TheJohnnyRogers and join in on the fun. All right, now back to the episode.
My dad is like, man, all of these government workers are overpaid. And I'm like, Dad, you work for the government. He's like, that's how I know we're overpaid.
He's like, no one needs this amount of money.
Yeah, well, it's definitely, the funny thing about my dad is that he always says stuff, and I never know if he's joking or not, but
my dad's the same way.
Yeah. Another thing he said to me was, Anto, you're the only person I know who does whatever he wants. And then I'm like, is that good or bad? Is that a compliment or not? I have no idea, right? So I'm like, is he kidding? Is he like, I don't think he's kidding, but I also think it's
encouraging me.
I have no idea. So, but I know my dad used to be a bit of a rebel, so I think that at the heart of it, there's a certain element of it that he is really happy of.
He's
maybe I wouldn't say
like,
happy
that
is
could
the
have
right
been
word, but
I would have went, you know.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of that too. Like my dad looks at me sometimes, and I can tell he's like, "All right, that's cool. Like maybe I would have gone down." You know what I mean? Like he's kind of like, "I get it, but I don't get it." Like, all right.
Yeah. Well, the pressure is also off because, you know, I'm really grateful to my older brother to a certain extent because he really followed a more traditional path.
I think
like,
fucked up. He really fucked up. So I'm
no. The opposite. He's very like. He has a great job. He has like a kid and like a wife and just a very like more so what would be expected of that. And I have gratitude for that too, because he kind of like, you know, he made sacrifices for our family to a certain extent. But at the same time,
my brother had a baby, and I'm like, thank you for taking that sacrifice, bro, because I don't want kids.
Thank you for not pulling out. We're so happy about that. Wow, great.
Thank you for using those truck stop condoms.
Oh
50%.
Man.
You're like 50% actually. Jesus.
But so one last thing though, before moving on from comedy and like kind of the progress of it, being able to actually apply for this grant, one of the things that I made sure of was to actually highlight my years as a comedian, and that was really important to me, right? Because when I first applied to the Canada Council, I got a call. I don't know if I ever told you about this. The guy, he ended up calling and he was like, hello, is this Anto? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, we're here at the Canada Council of the Arts, and we do not consider stand-up comedy as an art form. And I was just like, he's like, well, you can use your poetry and your storytelling, but comedy is not an art form. And then I was just like, oh God, like, I'm really glad you have this awesome accent, or this would be much more painful. Like, you know, like that's really what I said to him too.
For the last 15 years.
Yeah, it was crazy because, but the fucked up part was that it was still considered, like, I started poetry in 2011. So I'm still have been doing poetry at this point for like 9 years. But he was like, so we're now going to put you under a new artist. So I'm still applying as a new artist. It's so funny. I was rewarded as a new artist after I've been doing performance for 15 years. You know, and I'm like, why am I under this? But I mean, I'm not going to complain. I got funding for it, but it still is interesting for me, but I knew that I wanted to actually multiple people told me, hey, if they're not considering it art, like maybe take out the comedy out of your application. But I'm like, if I take that out, then that's just going to continue that it's not on any applications.
Yeah, you
And so
won't
I
be
actually,
the first one to do it.
yeah,
It's
so
like
I
your
ended up
Canadian
posting.
heritage moment. You should cut a
Well,
little commercial.
I'm actually the second. There was one other artist who ended up actually applying, and yeah, she ended up telling me about it, and she was like saying how she applied to do a tour and like all that stuff, which is amazing. So like it definitely is a trailblazer in her specific situation, and I'm really grateful for it. I also think that me being able to apply for it, especially under the multidisciplinary aspect of it, how many other artists do multiple things. So even for yourself, if you wanted to actually have events that included your music as well as included your comedy, I think that this is much more possible now that I'm not saying more because of me, but at least it's one step toward like further
Well, even
because of
talking
that,
about it
right?
right now, right? Like, there's going to be someone hearing this that's like, "Oh shit, this is possible. Like now I can go do this. This is actually a real thing." If you live in Canada,
Mm.
I'm sure if you lived in America, they have some sort of grant system, or at
Yeah.
least in your local municipality. But like, even if they don't, this is your cue to go try to start one, or like reach out to your local government and be like,
For
"Hey,
sure.
why aren't we funding arts?" Like that was the craziest thing. And Tamara Siobhan, who's going to be on the podcast too, made a brilliant point about this: is that your comedy show shouldn't cost less than a loaf of bread. Like,
Nah.
like bread right now is like $10, $15. You can charge $20 a ticket. You can charge $20 a ticket. I think that's
Yeah.
fair. Like
I still had I still
people went
had
2 years
that
without a lot of
anxiety.
shows.
Yeah.
Like
I still
you
had
want to
that
be entertained.
anxiety. Like when I was putting out my tickets for the
Mm-hmm.
show, I had that anxiety of like, oh man, are people going to be willing to pay this amount? You know, I want everybody to be able to afford it or that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like it's so important to be able to value your art for the amount that it really is. And also I wanted to put it out there too, during COVID, the last 2 years, the Canada Council and multiple other arts councils ended up getting a lot more funding. I think that they got over $1 million
Wow.
extra for funding different projects. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities inside of this. If I'm putting this out there, if anybody out there who's watching this and connecting with this, if you wanted to reach out and after my shows are done in May, so around either June, July, and forward, get in touch with me. You know, even if I don't know the answers for certain things, I have multiple people that I ended up actually supporting and helping me write my grants, and being able to actually reach out to people. That's a huge part of this. There's an actual flow of artists who are wanting to support each other. And I actually know artists who they're the ones who are reviewing a lot of the grant applications, and they know exactly what to look for in terms of that. So they were the ones who also coached me on how to apply for. Obviously, it's not the ones that they were in charge of.
Sure, but
Excuse
you
me, in charge of,
specifically,
but
yeah.
they can give you advice on just reviewing your application, making sure that it's solid, looking over the budgets, like this type of stuff. It seems very bureaucratic. It seems very annoying, but like it has given me so much support financially in terms of, I'm not saying it pays for everything and that I'm never gonna have to work again or whatever, but
No,
it
of
is
course.
such a great step because it alleviates a lot of the stresses of the every day of making my art, having to be able to be funding itself. That stress that I actually had. One of the reasons actually I got to this point too, and not to like, you know, high five the Canadian government too much. I'm saying thank you to a certain extent, but obviously there's a lot of stuff that but for me, I wouldn't have gotten to this point to apply for grants the way that I did if it wasn't for CRB and CERB. If those didn't exist and I saw how important it was for me to have financial stability, for years I was just funding myself through gigs and hosting weddings and like just hustling, doing button events and just so much
No, I watched you
pressure.
hustle, man. Like
Yeah,
the artist hustle is real. Lugging
yeah.
all those big crates and the tables and paying for events and having people try to rip you off, and it's
Oh
just
my
like
God.
you're like, this is my
Yeah,
livelihood, dude. What are you talking
yeah,
about? You know, like I
yeah.
get that.
It was crazy, man. It was crazy. And to be able to actually have the the work that I'm doing outside of the shows in itself being rewarded or being paid for financially by the way that it is now, this is definitely something that's alleviated a lot of the stresses of that, so that I can focus more on the art and I can be able to have that. So it's just such an important part of it that I think that I ignored for so long. And it's really just changed how I perceive, like how I've looked at it. It's not that they're, to a certain extent, I used to think that it was like selling out, to be honest.
Oh yeah,
They're order, but like they literally have not told me that I have to do anything except put on my posters that it was funded by the Canada Council of the Arts. Like that's literally the only thing that they've asked me to do.
And you have to open up every show to our dear Lord and Savior Justin Trudeau. You have to say a prayer to Trudeau. That'd be so funny if you open the show with that. You're like, as per Canadian government's request, we have to read you the following announcement. Yeah. There shall be no one saying anything bad about Justin Trudeau, or they will be ejected. People think like if they give you money, there's all of a sudden ties to it. And in some cases, government money, I understand, government money often has ties to it in some sense or another. They're going to want it back at some point, or your taxes are going to go up. But like, a grant is a grant. Like that's pretty well understood. They're saying, here's your money, go make us look good, you know?
Yeah. And they definitely, like, obviously, like any body in that way, like you're going to end up giving them shout outs, tagging them on stuff, putting their logos on stuff. But like, I'm happy to do that. I'm so grateful to be able to have that. And it's so interesting because I thought that there may be a shift in my art of, I want to make sure that what I'm doing in this isn't offensive to them or whatever, but it hasn't. It's actually solidified my art to a certain extent because I've been able to focus on what my truest intentions are, and that I wasn't just blinded by, okay, how do I make enough money from these events to not be able to not have to, owe money or
take out a loan or something.
So that's definitely been a shift in that. And I definitely am just seeing that. Obviously, I've just started working with them, so I don't know how it is after years of whatever. But at this point, that's kind of where my reflections on it as. And I definitely urge anybody who's out there who's even thought about it, just go to one of those sessions where they have so many free sessions, and there's always, obviously, a lot of them are just, this is what you need to do. A lot of it is just like, do the work, go and write it. Like that's like half of it.
Where do people go to like see all this stuff or to apply for the grants? Like what?
Yeah. So there's actually, for most of them, there's a couple steps. You actually have to apply to be a part of the council so that they know that you exist in the artist realm. And then after they accept you as either a new artist or as like a practicing artist, then there's a certain ones that you can apply for specifically. So it just sets you up to have the interview with the person. You have to put your resume forward. You have to give them all the events or shows or publications or things that you've done previously. And then they accept you, and then you end up applying for what it is that you need. So I would say the initial application isn't super difficult. You just let them know all the different stuff that you have been doing. But then once you actually apply for the grants, there's a lot of questions for it. And then the budget is one of the things I like stressed about the budget so much because I didn't want to make any mistakes. So that was definitely one of the more stressful things. But now that I've done one, I feel more comfortable with that. But that being the first one, I was just like, some nights I was just staring at it and I was just like, my eyes were like when you're too tired and you stare at something, your eye like kind of twitches. Like I definitely had like eye twitch moments because of the budget, and it's not like it's also daunting looking at a budget because you think you have to fill out everything, but in reality, it's just space so that you can fill it out if you need it. That's what I learned later. So one of the things that I'll put forward to people is that if they wanted somebody to just walk through that type of stuff, you could actually apply to get support, especially if you have any different abilities that you might need. If you have ADHD or neurodivergence or whatever things, like you can apply to get some support, and then people will help you read the applications as well as even help you write the applications and also do documentation for it as well. they provide that with the grants as well too. It's crazy.
That's
It's
awesome.
I didn't expect to end up coming on here and being like, hey, you want to work for the Canada Cat, like, but
Yeah, you're just one big advertisement for the Canada Council.
but it's more so because I
It
want
works.
artists
It really works.
I just want artists. I want artists to get
Yeah,
funding,
no.
man. I want people to get to a point where they're not just
I
like,
want people to succeed too, man. That's why I love
Yeah.
like talking about this stuff, is because I know, like, from personal experience, like a lot of the things that I've picked up, whether it's comedy or business wise, was from listening to podcasts. It was from listening to people that were like 30 years in the game, and they've already been there, done that, made as many mistakes as they could. And you can listen to these people just like a fly on the wall and just like take little bits. Like, obviously take everything we're saying with a grain of salt, but like there's still a lot of good information to be sent out. And especially like because it just happened for you, right? Like the website's up, like you've got tour dates coming, you've received the funding. And it wasn't even that long ago that we were just talking about like not being denied for saying that you're a comedian. You're like,
yeah, I didn't know. I had no idea,
Yeah.
but it's makes me really like happy that hopefully in the future other comedians can be applying for this and to be able to actually get the funding they need as well too. Especially like recording their albums, maybe even writing a book would be really interesting. I feel like someone like Alex would, when he wrote his book, he got connected with a publisher. But if you get connected with a publisher, there's also grants where you can apply for. The government will pay that publisher to publish your book through them.
Wow.
You know, just shit like that. There's so much innovation in terms of funding and stuff. So I've just been really grateful to learn about all this stuff, but it's only been recently that I even opened my eyes up to it. And what's crazy is that I've been in this game for 15 years till I finally accepted support and help, you know? And that's the thing, is that there's so much beauty to the struggle. There's so much sacrifice.
You can romanticize it a lot.
There is. At the same time, that romanticization also is love. Like it's love too, man. Like I do appreciate the struggle that I went through, because the gratitude I have now is just another level, you know, and I'm not at all going to take advantage of that. And that's to a certain extent how I bet you they knew that I wasn't going to run off to Vegas and double my money or whatever. Like
they could hear it in your voice. They're like, this guy really wants this.
This guy's desperate. This guy is
told
so
him comedians
desperate.
don't exist, and he just keeps insisting that they're real. They're real, I tell you.
I'm real, yeah.
Look, I'll come up with a pun right now.
Yeah, we've never met a real comedian before. Oh my goodness, you know. So what's so interesting too, one of the things that I feel as well, even just saying those words, like a real comedian, it's so interesting being multidisciplinary in the way that I am, is that sometimes I question, would I even be considered a comedian by the other comedians, right? And would I have that acceptance of the other artists because I've put myself into multiple categories, honestly. Like depending on who you ask, they'll describe me as something else, right? And there's so many labels that have come before, and that's one of the interesting things about my life, is that it's hard to describe to people what and who I am sometimes, you know, and
that's my
to
favorite,
be able to
though.
actually
Evan's the same way. Like, describe an 11 show. You can't. You just got to go see it, you know? Like, describe an Anto free flow showcase. You just got to go see it. Like, you can't really, you could try to describe it, but the words aren't there. Like, even for myself, like, I would just refer to myself as an entertainer, because at a base level, my goal is always to just entertain an audience, whether it's in front of me or it's online or in whatever way. Entertain and inform, I'd say. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the challenges is that entertainer, probably like 20 years ago, people are like, so you're a magician.
Yeah.
Like,
Which
what
fine.
entertainment aspect? What entertainment aspects do you not want us to know that you are entertaining in, that you call yourself an entertainer, right? But now I think that there is a new, like, it's different, because there's so many avenues for us to be entertainers, especially when you start incorporating online aspect as well too. That there's so many people who are comedians and they've never stepped on stage before, you know, and that's, to me, is accepted by me, but everybody has their own definitions of things, right? And I honestly believe that if people don't respect another artist for just continuing to create art and to perform, and they judge them for whatever it is that they may be doing, I honestly think that comes from a place of their insecurities as well too. If they're desperate for other people to call them a comedian, then
Yeah.
it makes them feel, oh my God, like I'm questioning if I am a comedian or not or whatever. And I hear about this a lot. Bobby Lee talks about it a lot on Tiger Belly, how he's acting with some of the greatest actors, and he's there and he's in a scene with them and he just feels like such a fraud. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, how long have you been acting? He's like, I don't know, like 20 years. And it's like,
Yeah.
what are you talking? Like, obviously you're an actor now, but because of where he came from and where like, I have those moments as well too. The two artists, the performance artists that I have on InnerGenerational with me, Shadell as well as Siddhartha, both of them, the way in which they operate is just so dope. Like they're just artists through and through, everything that they do of that, right? But sometimes they'll share a piece of music and I'm just blown away by it. And then I look at what I'm about to share and my joke is about shitting my pants. And I'm just like, are we really on the same level of artists? Like,
you're like, that's not fair to you.
And that's what's so interesting. It's like as if whatever avenue that I'm going in, whatever labels that it may be, when I'm doing poetry, the amount of puns that I do in my poems and the way in which I operate inside of my poetry, it's very different than other people too. So what avenue do I really feel like I'm truly welcomed in that way? And that's one of the things I realized is that because I didn't have a space that I felt completely welcomed in, that through and through, I'm not saying that people didn't welcome me the best that they could and people weren't kind and supportive, and yes, but
you're saying it from your own mindset of
from my truest self. Yeah, I didn't have that. So that's why I created my own platforms, right? I created the shows. I created even this has been starting from the beginning, even when I was 3 years in and I ended up realizing in when I was in Ottawa, I was like, oh wow, like I don't feel like I'm a club comic. I don't feel like I want to just go in and please the club owners. I'm just going to create my own things. Even if I don't make any money from it and it's purely out of passion, I'm going to create my own things so I can say and do whatever it is that I want to on my own. And I didn't know that that was going to be bombardment of comedy on a Friday night at the Shanghai in Ottawa. When on Saturdays, I'll host the karaoke's, and then once a month, we're going to drop a show on people. We don't even advertise it most of the times. And just, I didn't know that that's what it was going to be, but that's what happened. And for me, it was just such a blessing to be able to be in that position. And there's a lot of artists, a lot of performers that I feel that might not feel confident enough to take that step because they might, oh, wow, that takes so much effort. It takes so much time. It's a lot of management, a lot of conversations behind the scenes with people to run a show. There's a lot of different things that go on.
I think the biggest thing for people is like the fear of rejection is what honestly stops a lot of people. And you can link that as well to like being a people pleaser or caring too much about what people think about you. But like, I think the person that is almost best suited for starting their own shows is like the salesman, is the person that can get 100 no's and just keep going because they know eventually there's going to be a yes. There's going to be somebody that's like, all right, cool. Let's try a show here at my bar. But you can't get there unless you keep going and keep getting denied and keep trying again and again and again.
Yeah. And so many stories that I've heard of people even starting comedy clubs was like, I just wasn't getting enough work, or I didn't feel satisfied with what was out there or whatever, things like that. So for me now, especially, that's pretty much what I ended up doing. Like even the grant that I have that I got, it wasn't even a collective grant. It wasn't like, oh, you have to bring in other artists to perform. It's actually all a grant specifically to highlight me as an artist. But the way that I operate in general, there's always a communal element in it, right? I don't operate in a way where I just want to highlight myself as an artist because I want the community uplifts me. It makes me better. I've already benefited from sharing my work with others and getting their support and having them help me. And I've learned so much from them and the healing that they're doing in this project, because it's really forced us to look at our lives and the things that we are connecting with. So even just an example of something. So when I was growing up, when I found out that my gong had he had throat cancer, I was so shocked because I was like, how is that possible? He didn't even smoke. How did he end up getting throat cancer? I thought that the only way you get throat cancer is through smoking. So then for years, I just thought that he randomly got throat cancer and that he was just bad luck and that sucked. And then years later, probably just like 4 or 5 years ago, I found out that he actually did smoke and that he also drank, and all of these normal things that humans do. But because my family had buried it for so long, because there was a certain shame to the idea that somebody smoked, and also I don't want to say like that it's wrong that they did that, because they might have their own reasons for that. Maybe that was his personal like wishes and the way in which he was operating. But I think that it's important for me to share this because that actually made me respect and love him more, because he wasn't just an avatar of my reverie. He wasn't just this person on a pedestal. He was a human. And that humanity made me respect him and realize that I could also be this level of incredible human and treating people with this type of love. Because before this, I just thought he was a perfect like God type thing, right? And when I felt that way, I felt so disconnected from him to just put him on this pedestal that I didn't think that I can be that loving. I didn't think that I could be that forgiving. I didn't think that I can care about other people to this level, that I wouldn't be a good parent because I wouldn't have been able to put other people ahead of me. Whereas when I realized that he was just a human who loved this deeply, it showed me that I can do that too. And that humanity is what actually elevated, and the vulnerability of my family for sharing that with me. And the thing is, I'm not here to expose secrets from my family so that everybody suffers from knowing that, like, that's not what this is. It's me sharing parts of my family that I actually have pride in. I'm proud that we come from a family that isn't perfect, that we have messy parts of it, we have addictions, we have realness, because if not, then we're not actually humans, we're not authentic. We end up being these characters that a lot of people put into movies that, yes, oh, I love that movie, but only in nostalgia. You don't actually connect to, for me, a lot of characters, I couldn't truly connect to them once I started doing the real work in myself, because they were just an avatar of what other people had created, so that an audience of a large amount of people can like this character. Whereas the true depth of the love that you can have for a real human, a real character, I believe, is what I'm pushing people to look at. All of these mistakes or things that we look at and that we're shameful of, these vulnerable things that we share with our therapists, these things that we're hiding because we're not like wanting people to know. It's not, I'm not saying force yourself to share that now, but take the time that you need to share that, but pair that with the healing as well. So I'm not going around being like, hey, my gongi used to smoke and he used to drink, and then that's it. And then that's it. But it's like, I'm pairing it with the healing that's doing that my family experienced in sharing that. Why was it necessary for my family to share this with me? Because they needed to heal from these secrets as well too, right? That's part of a lot of what the intergenerational trauma is. If we're hiding this stuff and we're shameful of it, then it eats at us. It makes us feel as if we have something to be shameful. Whereas so many of these things it was a mistake, you know, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Full circle, right back to like, don't hide your mistakes. Don't be ashamed of your mistakes. Like, feel free enough to be able to explain where you went wrong, because that shows a sense of self-awareness, which then shows that you're growing. It's the people who make mistakes again and again and again and never are thinking about it that are the issue. You know, those are the ones that you're supposed to be like, hey, wake up. You know, you're human, and it's later than you think. Like, it's always
well, that's the pattern. Yeah, the idea of it being later too, though, sometimes people need to just lose stuff to get the message, you know, like sometimes you need to go through a breakup, you need to lose connection with family members, you need to have friends who can't connect with you anymore because you've hurt them too much, you know, and that's why relationships are so telling, right? You're not only having your own self-work, you're learning about another person who's doing their own work, but there's this third entity that's being created. Because even right now, our conversation, I have certain things that I was like, oh, that'd be cool to talk about here. You had an idea of what we're going to possibly talk about, but what's that third is the actual podcast, the idea of the conversation, be able to the unknown that's going to happen, the curiosity of that, right? And that's a huge part of what I'm learning in expressive art therapy in school right now, is that it's about being able to come into situations and be curious and be open to it, and as these messages are pouring in, to be aware enough to be able to notice those lessons that are being put forward. That's why I'm still obsessed with that word serendipity, right? It's the aptitude for being, for making desirable discoveries by accident. So you're strong enough and understanding enough so that when these gifts of your curiosity, of being in the moment, show up, you can capture those and be like, I'm going to put that in my pocket, or I'm going to put that right here. And like, I'm taking that with me because that showed me what lesson or what thing I needed at this moment. So I think that that's where a lot of people get stuck, is that they're like, I know myself enough, I know exactly what I need, I know that, and then there isn't that openness to the possibility. And people talk about this a lot too, even in romantic relationships. A lot of times, it's funny because I'm single, so I'm like, take this for what it's worth. Anybody who's in a relationship is like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? But in relationships, I noticed that there's a lot of challenges in the relationships because there isn't that openness for that third entity, that curiosity or the adventure of the relationship. It ends up being like, okay, we know what each person is, and then we're just going to make sure that each person gets what they want, and then it's repeated over and over and over again. But when you create this like beautiful third connection or entity that you have there, that sweetness that comes with you know, being in that together, there's such a beauty to that. There's such a playfulness and a fun in that. And I definitely urge people to explore that with each other, try those new things.
Don't have something off limits either. I'll say to anyone who's like in a relationship as well, and something that I found as being super helpful is, and it can be randomly, it can just be when the thought occurs to you. It shouldn't be like before or after a fight, let's just say that. But a good question to pry into that curiosity, if you will, is to just say to your partner, hey, like, is this relationship going in the direction that you like? Like, do you think it's going in a good direction? And you answer the same thing, right? And you can really get a good idea, because it's just like what you said, same thing coming to a podcast. You each are coming into it with your idea of how it's going to be based on based on like the front imagery that you've gotten from that person or what they've presented to you. You're basing your interactions now off of that. So if you don't pry any further, you're not going to understand where they're coming from.
I don't know if pry is the word that I like. Just
no, but some people you do have to like. Some people, pry, I guess, is a terrible word, but you know what I mean. Like, I'm sure some people in relationships are like, it's like pulling teeth. It's like, you should probably leave then. It should be an easy, smooth as butter kind of conversation at that point. But I guess you'll know the answer to the question if it's prying.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I do put forward is that's why I love going on adventures with people, especially when you're first getting to know someone. You go maybe a small town or like hit up a waterfall on a hike or something. The day that you have with this person is to a certain extent telling of what, obviously, you know, people put on a front at first and aren't always like honest with who they are or things like that. It's challenging sometimes.
A lot of that is an environment, though. I think if you took someone out just for a walk, it's pretty hard to like put on a persona.
Yeah, because you're with them for such a long period of time.
Yeah, it'll drop at some point, like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that is interesting, is like being able to be in the position to get to know somebody and then also see how they operate in that day. It's like seeing if it's just compatible or if it's fun, and like that randomness. Oh, let's just go on an adventure. Let's just choose a random spot. You don't fully know what's going to happen, and then that's part of the fun of what you're able to have there. And that's kind of what I want, man. Like, I want the audience to be one entity, me to be one entity, or like me and the rest of the intergenerational show. And then whatever happens there, that curiosity of something happens. If like something happens in the audience and like I see it and it's going to happen, I'm probably going to talk about it, or I'm probably going to at least comment about it, or like I'll finish the piece that I'm in right now and then just be like, damn, like you guys are really trying to like trip me out there, you know? Because I am, just to be completely open about this, I am trying some things in the show that I never thought that I would connect with. Like I actually yesterday just contacted my cousin. She actually was a dancer for many years and had her own dance studio. And I contacted her because there was just a transition from one piece to into the next like story that felt like there was a big gap. And I was like, because it was about my gongong, and this is her gongong as well too. It was such like a beautiful concept of, hey, maybe I could contact her and see what type of movements or even dance moves type stuff that I can incorporate inside of it. And I'm not at a point where I'm like, okay, this next part is a dance number. I'm not at that skill level or whatever at all, but even just transitional movements and the feeling of that, how to operate and showcase that. I'm so curious to see what would come up with that. So that's the openness that I have, I think, with that. And also to
putting yourself in like a corner, like we were talking about earlier, like pigeonholing yourself as an entertainer. I'm an observational comic. It's like, stop labeling yourself.
Yeah, because there's openness, right? And also I'm just curious, right? Like that's really what this is. And even to make fun of myself a little bit too. This is what happens when Canada Council gives me money. I'm gonna try random shit. You don't like how I'm going like this on stage for 5 minutes. Well, maybe you shouldn't have dropped $60K into my bank account right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's jokes.
Yeah, man, it's always so good to catch up, man. To see how well you're doing too, and like I always feel like you keep your feet moving. That's really a good way. Like in football, they say like, actually I don't know that much about football, but
you're about to go to a huge sports analogy.
Keep your feet moving. Keep be light on your toes.
Sports.
Like that kind of. Sports reference here, yeah.
Insert sports reference here.
Yeah.
We just cut to a highlight.
Yeah. This is what he means. That'd be hilarious if you just showed like 2 feet, like going like this.
No, like man, I love catching up with you too. That was like another reason for starting the podcast. I'm like, it's also an excuse for me to just like hang with friends and catch up because I'm not in the same city anymore. And like a lot of friends have just moved all over the place just because it was like the right move for them. So, man, I always appreciate you making the time. I want to, just for the audience here, because we're on to an hour, go follow Anto at Anto Punfu on Instagram. InnerGeneration.com is the website. We've got tour dates. I listed all of this in the intro. Shouted out your tour dates.
Okay, amazing.
So, people will get to see that. But if you've made it all the way to the end, thank you. We appreciate you. Oh, wait, and there's Instagram too for InnerGenerational?
Yeah, there is, yeah.
That follow button.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the support and like just being able to have set dates too. It's so motivating to be like, I got to make sure this is done, So that's been the last couple of weeks have been the best pressure, I would say. I've just been so lucky to be surrounded by people who are all hustling. Everybody's working so hard. Today we had like a wardrobe / stage props meeting, and like just talking about that stuff already is making it so real. And then talking about rehearsals and shit like that, I'm like, damn. I also we don't have to talk about this too much, but I also ended up getting into 2 fringe festivals. So I'm going to be bringing InnerGenerational to these other stages as well. I got into the Guelph Fringe Festival as well as the Mississauga Fringe as well too. So it's just both of them aren't too far, and like it gives me an opportunity to do 7 more shows. And one of the things that I really want to do is bring other Asian artists to the stage. So if any Asian artists out there, you're watching this and you're wanting to find a place, whether we end up getting you on the Fringe Festival shows this year or even next year, we're going to have more showcases and stuff. So this is not just a 1-year project. We're really wanting to expand it next year into like a larger entity. Like one of the reason that I actually started this was because I don't know if you ever heard of Manifesto, but I saw how Manifesto holds themselves. They're just incredible festival that they do, where they have the artists as the main attraction and they put them at the forefront. At the same time, they had all of these other parts of the actual festival, right? And that's really what I want to do with InnerGenerational. Is I want next year to be able to actually have our website set up where all of the things that are happening for Asian Heritage Month, I want to be able to list it all there. Any festivals that are happening, any Asian restaurants that want to be a part of an Asian Heritage Month, get in touch with me, email me. I
could
won't be able
even
to get back
accept
to
one.
anybody until June or July, but
You should have an
definitely
auto
get in touch with
reply.
me. Yeah. Sorry, I'm busy. I'm putting together the show, but I do want it to expand. And I actually spoke to the Asian Heritage Month in Montreal and the Festival R.I.S.E, and the guy who runs it, he's just this incredible, like, I randomly met him in this meeting of Asian artists and stuff, and he was telling me how the way he actually started was just acknowledging and highlighting all of the works that are already happening, and that's how we start. So in Toronto, there's a lot of stuff going on, but if you look up Asian Heritage Month on Google, it's literally like Toronto Library from like 3 years ago. It's like there's also the Real Asian Film Festival, but that happens in November. They have some like stuff going on during Asian Heritage Month, but I want there to be a hub where all of these events are all listed, and that everybody is able to benefit from being able to get a lot of this content out there, because I want everybody to be able to experience these different stories. There's so many stories
100%.
from so many different
maybe you could even
from so many different
eventually
communities.
at some point start like an intergenerational festival, like have literally your own festival where
Oh, that's what I'm doing.
that's what it's
that's
like
what I want to
coming
do.
together, right? Yeah, that's the move. That's
the
definitely
move,
the
yeah.
growing point. Because then
Yeah.
once you go to other fringe festivals and get those credits as like, this is the type of show that it is, and you're getting that kind of press, it just makes it that easier to promote your own festival for it. And
Absolutely.
have your own calendar of events for Asian Heritage Month, and instead of relying on like maybe a community page manager to update the website for they're just partnered with, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh, we'll take care of it on our end and let people know what's going on.
For sure.
I'm not
for
going to
sure.
hound you guys to fix your website with events.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I think just taking the step forward in terms of the show, I want the show to be highlighted this year, but down the road, I really want it to expand and grow so that all of these other businesses, I don't want people to feel like they're just out there swimming on their own. I saw there was also the Filipino Food Festival. I don't know the exact name of it. I'm so sorry for that, but I wanted to highlight it too, because they're making moves, man. They're really creating an interest in the Filipino foods, and I'm really hyped about that, right? And so to be able to do that where we're all under the same umbrella, so that we can support and help each other, so that no community feels like they're kind of doing it on their own. That's what it's all about, and I'm really looking forward to. Sorry?
Asian Alliance.
Yeah, exactly, right?
AA.
Yeah.
The AA you want to talk about.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, man, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so grateful to be able to talk about all these stuff. Also, I got lots of ideas from you to talk about this too, and that's one of the best parts about connecting with you, is we're able to actually grow together, learn from each other,
and we can rewatch this. Usually our conversations just went into the ether, and if nobody wrote it down, that was just it.
Exactly. That's awesome,
nice
man.
To get it recorded.
Absolutely. And hit me up whenever you're back in Toronto. I have a connection where we can record podcast in person as well too. So if you're in town, we should definitely do one together, and I would love to talk more about your projects and everything that you're working on as well too, man.
Yeah, dude, that'd be dope. Thank you everybody for watching and listening. If you're listening on iTunes, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review or share the episode with your friend. That always helps too. But this has been Anto Chan.
And your album. Yeah, everybody go and grab that. Cop one.
I've been your host, Johnny Rogers, everybody. Keep it classy. You've been listening to The Johnny Rogers Show. New episodes air every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.